Welcome to the CCN podcast, where we discuss the latest trends, companies, and people shaping the cryptocurrency space. I'm your host, Jake Sylvester. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the 15th episode of the CCN podcast. This week, we're going to talk about more price increases. Representative Emmer's plan to introduce 3 new bills into Congress, all pertaining to blockchain regulation, $59 million that was stolen in a Japanese hack. And we're going to finish up with the interview with the CTO of Constellation Labs. There's a video of this interview as well that we will link to in the description. So first up, price increases. Bitcoin is up 3%, Ethereum is up 10%, and the entire coin market capitalization is up 8%. This latest round of price increases has brought some ambitious price targets. First of all, Tim Draper said this week that he was standing by his $250,000 price target for 2022. This is an ambitious price target considering right now the market is not even at $7,000 and the trend over the course of 2018. Nonetheless, he's sticking by his prediction. Next up, billionaire Novogratz has set a $10,000 price target for the end of 2018. This would be a $3,000 increase from the price right now, and is not as ambitious as Tim Draper's, but is still pretty bold considering the bearish market we've been in for the past 6 months. Next up, we've had a lot of news pertaining to some more regulatory pressure this week. So first of all, U.S. Representative Tom Emmer has introduced 3 new blockchain bills. The first is simply a House resolution to express support for cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. This wouldn't really do anything, but just would tell blockchain companies that Congress is interested in what you're doing and wants to support it. The second is called the Blockchain Bill Regulatory Certain Act, which aims to make sure that multi-signature providers and miners would not need to register as money transmitters. This is important because if these miners and multi-sig providers are required to register as money transmitters, they can be criminally liable for any money laundering that happens under their watch. And they would need to comply with a lot of AML and KYC regulations that technically are not possible based on the way they transmit money. Everyone thinks this is something that is implicit, and this bill aims to confirm that legally. The third bill is called the Safe Harbor for Taxpayers with Forked Assets Act of 2018, and it aims to address confusion surrounding how to report gains made as the result of forks, such as the Bitcoin Cash fork. It'll be interesting to see if these laws are heard on the floor at all, and when they are, how they're reacted to. Emmer is not the only representative of Congress trying to formalize blockchain regulation. This week, 5 members of Congress have, quote, strongly urged them to update Bitcoin tax regulation in a letter. This follows another letter sent in 2017 and really aims at encouraging Congress to update regulations surrounding Bitcoin and blockchain in general, and potentially even recapture some of the lost tax revenues based on the current ambiguity. Another person putting regulatory pressure on federal agencies is ex-FDIC chair Sheila Bair, who thinks we need a federal framework to regulate cryptocurrencies. She said, quote, "There's a lot of stuff in there that's not particularly valuable. I don't think this is a space that retail investors should be wading into," end quote. Essentially, the FDIC was set up to protect consumers from bank failures and really to protect retail investors. So it makes sense that she would aim to protect them by restricting their access to these investments. Now, this approach is not without its critics, with many saying that by restricting retail access to investments like Bitcoin and even early stage companies, you're causing a wider economic disparity rather than protecting these investors. The position Congress takes on this will be vital to how markets behave going forward. In what is probably the biggest news this week, Japanese cryptocurrency exchange Zaif was hacked and lost $59 million. The hackers stole various amounts of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Modacoin from the exchange's hot wallet, collectively worth 6.7 billion yen. Almost immediately after the hack happened, Japanese police published a report saying that crypto theft cases had tripled in the first half of 2018 to almost 530 million. Japanese crypto exchange seemed to be particularly vulnerable to attacks, with Coincheck being hacked and neighboring Korean exchange Bithumb being hacked not once, not twice, but 3 different times. Next up this week, CoinSquare has listed a blockchain ETF on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Essentially, they're using machine learning to pick cryptocurrencies to invest in. It'll be interesting to see how this performs and might even give American regulators some idea of how these stocks can be manipulated and maybe even speed up the expectation that a Bitcoin ETF will be ready by May of 2019. Finally, this week, we have an interview with Constellation Labs CTO. This interview gets pretty technical, but it's definitely worth sticking around for, and I encourage you to Google any of the concepts that you're maybe a little fuzzy on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the interview. How's it going, everybody? I'm here with Wyatt, the CTO of Constellation Labs. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm excellent. It's a pleasure to be here, Jake.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on. So tell us a little bit about what Constellation Labs is.
Totally. So Constellation Labs is like our company that exists to support the production of our protocol, which is Constellation. And we're really trying to tackle some of the major pain points to adoption of like blockchains in consumer and enterprise applications.
Got it. So what does your typical use case look like for your product?
Totally. So, I think one of the best uses of our product, or I guess real comparative advantage, is our ability to integrate with existing technologies. We took an approach where we wanted to use like a language and an existing set of tools that would interoperate with what most people use in their backends, which is, some type of JVM-like language. We chose Scala because it's like what we love and we know. And that can easily be ported over to something like an Android SDK as well. So the ability to basically be directly imported and hosted within some type of an application that's already on your server somewhere is kind of new. So if you want to perhaps add some type of cryptographic security to like a streaming app or a big data app or something related to like sensor networks, anything with external value, you can put a node directly inside your application and basically host your own blockchain that will validate the data that you care about.
So you guys are very developer friendly, and you think that's going to really propel your growth?
That's kind of the hope. So from our background, like me and the team are all like engineers. We've been working in like the big data, machine learning space, and scalability and stuff, which is basically the thing everyone cares about right now. So we know what we know in order to build these types of applications. So we wanted to basically just be something that either a real developer or someone who works at a company would see and say, hey, this is actually as legit as something from the Apache Foundation, and we would love to check them out. Like sort of appeal to a different crowd than the CryptoKitties or like kind of like ICO markets. So we're very much just like tech focused, and we want to just create something that's pretty kick-ass.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about your background and how it kind of spurred you into Constellation Labs.
Oh, sure. So I'm actually I studied like physics and math in college. I just sort of learned how to program tangentially. So I actually worked in the South Bay at NASA Ames. I wrote an algorithm for the SETI Institute to try and classify whether a stream of information contains some kind of communication a la aliens. So that was kind of cool. It was my first foray into programming and machine learning, and I moved in. I actually studied and did my thesis in subatomic physics and quantum computing. So from that perspective, I got a job in machine learning out here in San Francisco. I love it, and I've just been working in the big data machine learning space as a software engineer ever since, both at startups and at enterprise.
So what are some of the biggest problems you see now across the decentralized space? So Ethereum, EOS, all the current chains out there.
I just don't really think people are in it because I'm just curious because of like The focus, I think, is more so on adapting to the existing community of people who are focused on crypto, as opposed to sort of connecting the dots to the greater technology world. So I just really would love to see, not that this is a criticism, but I just love to see more focus on trying to integrate with the tools everybody uses, and I'd love to see people actually using cryptocurrencies or distributed ledgers in applications like Facebook or Google or whatever in your daily life.
So what's a use case for any type of distributed ledger technology in an existing application that you see people implementing?
What's a use case that I see people implementing that kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Well, I think right now, honestly, the most important, obviously fundraising, launching a token on Ethereum, but I think the real idea is that people see a distributed ledger sort of as like a database. So obviously you have solutions, I won't say Cloud because I haven't seen anything from them yet. I don't think anyone has, but IPFS. The idea is sort of this is a way that we can, blockchain is a way to self-regulate the validity of data in a database. I think that's a totally valid use case, and I think that solutions sort of going from that perspective forward have a lot of traction and utility right now.
So you kind of see people doing writes to a database and just every so often checking in and saying, oh, this is what we actually wrote. Okay, these two match.
Well, I believe that's sort of the guise that these projects have. Personally, the idea of trying to store actual data on a chain isn't really the way to do it, but basically using a blockchain to self-regulate data is essentially, I think, the most applicable use case, whether it's a database or whatever. Constellation does the same thing, but we're really focused on actually using that self-regulatory ability in order to handle partitioning, which then allows us to solve scalability and also liquidity issues.
Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit. What is partitioning?
Totally. So for anyone who's technical, if you guys have ever used a MySQL database or something, you guys have maybe heard of sharding or splitting up tables across different worker nodes, sort of like that executor or worker architecture. It's pretty common. It's a way in which we can apply data locality optimizations to speed lookups and computation. So from that perspective, when you want to move over to something a little bit more data intensive, like a big data application, like a Hadoop or Spark, that notion of a shard is referred to as a partition, and it can sort of be ephemerally stored on multiple different devices, but it just represents a subset of data that has some, usually some type of optimal arrangement or ordering or basically distribution across different nodes. So a partition is basically a way of saying I have data split up across different nodes that has some basically invariant data locality maintained. So basically what that means is in real time, if a node wants to join or leave my network and that node is hosting a lot of data that's being used by other people, there is going to be logic where that person can reshuffle and send that data elsewhere so that there is no issue with the network after it leaves. So it's sort of like a rebalancing that happens implicitly just as a part of the protocol. So it sort of autonomously rebalances the data to ensure the same efficiency for lookups and just whatever utility you need from our chain of the greater ecosystem.
So in that case, you mentioned Hadoop there, right? And let's say I'm doing machine learning across 10,000 servers. Do you see a separate Constellation Labs chain running across those 10,000 servers?
Well, so that's kind of the way, that's sort of the thing we really hope to see. So our approach to building decentralized or distributed applications is actually to empower someone to build their own chain. Constellation is sort of basically in Polkadot, they use a phrase called relay. We're really kind of the underlying consensus as a service, kind of maybe not that, but we are really the underlying layer that will help connect these different types of protocols. And the idea is that someone who wants to build, basically have a use case that's very specific, like perhaps doing machine learning or something, will take our actual implementation of our protocol, make some modifications, and host their own parent chain or something running in parallel. And then there's a little bit of math we have to do to figure out whether or not either chains are supporting each other referentially by validating transactions. But with that in mind, it allows your application, your machine learning, very data-intensive focused application, to exist in parallel with the greater ecosystem. So getting all the benefits it needs in its own chain, but without bogging down the greater community. So yeah, the goal here is basically you build your own blockchain, your own decentralized application is actually your own protocol, your own chain, your own DAG, however you want to build it, but that validates data for your own specific use case and doesn't bog down everybody else.
So as far as your business model goes? Are you guys consulting? Do you have a token? How does that work?
Sure. So we have a token right now, which you guys can feel free to take a look at. We're available on IDEX and KuCoin, and growing every day. So please feel free to take a look at that. It's a representation of our actual mainnet that's going to go live. So if you're bullish and you love it, please feel free to support and help out. And we also have a very extensive bounty program through our Orion portal. And any developer, please feel free to reach out to us on GitHub to get some tokens, and for some commits. But I guess from the business model perspective, we're really focused on trying to get as many dApps to use our stuff as possible. Focus on connecting with different industry partners to work with actual enterprises and get us to be inside their stack. And the revenue model, as of right now, is really tied to the utility that our network brings. So, as we continue to help people, and sort of in the same sense that how staking works, having a lot of our DAG will help you have a higher throughput for your application. So, there's definitely that sort of incentive of kind of like selling real estate. But I will say that we are not a staked token. Everything is based on reputation, so you cannot buy the ability to influence consensus whatsoever.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about your consensus mechanism, just a high-level overview.
Totally. So we're taking an approach similar to Ripple and a couple of other chains that is, but is still kind of not widely as adopted, which is to use a reputation score. So, I'm a machine learning guy. Everyone on my team is. We found that, first and foremost, it was why don't we just try to use that to improve our own fault tolerance? And there's some amazing stuff out there. A great paper called Guru, where some people were able to improve the traditional Byzantine fault tolerance thresholds using a reputation-based consensus. So how are we? So there's that, and then also what sort of makes that different? So one can also sort of think about DAG as representing both, sort of the participation in the network. So since our node, we have the ability to host really light nodes. As people validate transactions, that's going to add clout to their public key. So the more things you sign, the more you contribute, the more we can rely upon you in the future to contribute again. So the amount of times you give, it basically equals the amount of stuff you get, and that's how we get around transaction fees. So obviously the cost is going to be really low for people to use just on their own phone or something, but if you're an enterprise, right, and let's say that you have a giant server farm, you could constantly be increasing your own cache or swaths of DAG, which is benefit for you and all your hosting costs, but also that excess DAG will allow you to increase the throughput that the network allows you in times of heavy traffic. Now, also, let's say that there was an issue where the heavy traffic out was greater than the amount of DAG that you had available. You could purchase DAG and use that to access throughput in the network. That actual DAG, or basically that what you purchase, wouldn't allow you to affect consensus, though, which is a major issue with staked protocols, and the staking approach to basically the staked approach to implementing everything we did without staking.
Got it. So one of the interesting things about your application is you're heavily focused on distributed data processing, right? So
that's definitely an aspect of it, but I really just want to hone into that. The idea is the ability to integrate with any kind of a back end. So whether you're just a website or you're doing some high intensive data apps, we really want people to be able to integrate with what already exists. So we do want to be the thing that people can mold to use to their own use case, but we want to basically give them the ability to make this thing exactly what they want. So data-intensive applications are something I think we're going to do really well with, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we can't integrate with mobile applications, sensor networks, basically anything that can run a JVM.
So where I was going with that, though, is one of the interesting things about data-intensive applications is you'll spin them up, right? Maybe you're using spot instances, which are a really cheap way to do computing. So you'll spin up 1,000, 10,000 instances for an hour or two, and then you'll spin them down. How do you guys deal with that from a network perspective? The rapid addition and removal of nodes on the network?
That's an excellent question. It actually is. It's very integral to how we manage to get this thing to work. And the way that we do that, or are doing that, is by connecting our joining and leaving logic to the way in which we handle dynamic partitioning. So if a node wants to spin up, basically it needs to figure out how can it be the most optimal for the network and provision itself accordingly. And then when it wants to leave, it has to do the same thing as well. Otherwise, it'll pay a significant penalty associated to its public key. So I guess for someone in let's do the TLDR here. spin up a bunch of nodes. Just make sure that your nodes have time to join effectively, and then when you want to leave them, make sure that you have a shutdown process that doesn't immediately just rage kill them.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, how long does that shutdown process take?
It's a great question. So I hesitate to give any metrics right now because where we are in our development is it's going to change pretty significantly. So I would say that it should only take no more than a few rounds of not necessarily consensus, but because we aren't blocked on consensus, but there is essentially a flow of data sort of going deeper into our topology as well as from the depths outward. And what will need to happen is observation edges is what our data type is called. Edges from deeper will need to be heard by the outer edges and communicate sort of along that path. So in short, something that has more responsibility, hosting more data, that is essentially the executor of a worker will need to have a full sort of handoff. And that will happen sort of like any kind of system does. And it also is bottlenecked by the ability for that data to be transferred to the other node across the network if necessary. So honestly, bounded by network effects, I'd say.
Got it. Cool. So where do you see your project in 5 years?
Wow. I would love my project in 5 years to. Everybody in marketing is going to hate me for saying I'm not the industry leader and kicking ass. I think that every single project out here has its place in the ecosystem. We have stuff we're really passionate. We want to solve that integration, scalability, and liquidity problems sort of from our approach. What we would love to do is have our niche in the ecosystem and be well integrated with every other protocol that has its niche. We just want to be a big happy family.
Cool. Well, it was awesome having you on, and we'll do it again in 5 years. Hopefully before then.
Cool. Yeah, right. Cool. It was a pleasure, Jake. Thanks, man.
Thanks.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are only those of its hosts and guests, and sometimes of no one at all. The CCN podcast was produced by Rockwood Audio and hosted by ccn.com. To find out more about CCN and the podcast, check us out at ccn.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CryptoCoinsNews. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe.